Lord of the Oasis. Chapter 181, The Black Gemstone in its Body. After the battle ended, the corpse of the demonized creature lay at their feet. Kant pulled out his knight's sword. Black blood mixed with grayish-brown brain matter dripped from the tip of the sword. Black blood and brain matter also flowed out from the wound in the ear hole. The demonized creature was no longer twitching. It was clear that Kant's decisive strike had directly pierced through the eardrum and ear bone of the demonized creature. The sword penetrated deep into its head and destroyed its brain, killing it within a short period of time. "There are no casualties," the Sarandian horseman reported. "Well done," Kant nodded. The horsemen pulled out their spears from the corpse of the black bear-like demonized creature. Fortunately, the 30 spears had evenly distributed the impact, so none of the spears were bent or any or broken. They all frowned as they looked at the corpse on the ground. There were pitch-black scales all over the body's fur, just like the scales of a snake. However, most of the scales were concentrated on the chest, shoulders, and arms. As for the neck, back, and limbs, there were not many of it. It was as if they were wearing simple animal scales. If their expectations were correct, this was the first time they saw a demonized creature. Even Kant was the same. He only seen similar illustrations in the books of the Academy. Looking at its polar bear-sized gigantic body, its body that was nearly 3 meters long and its fat was still exposed under its scales, he thought of the scientific name of this demonized creature. Demonized black bear. Kant frowned. This was undoubtedly one of the more troublesome types of demonized creatures. It was a demonized creature that was originated from a black bear. Similarly, there were other types of demonized creatures, but most of them were based on carnivores. For example, demonized black bears, demonized wolves, and demonized lions were the most common. But their destructive power was not weak at all. If ordinary people encountered them, it would be a one-sided massacre. Only elite footmen led by knights could gather their troops to surround and hunt down these creatures. Otherwise, just relying on the weak hunting bows of the hunters would not be able to kill these sturdy, fast, and fearless demonized creatures. They were crazy demonized creatures after all. It would be bad if they encountered a stronger demonized creature. It was similar to the demonized wolf that was hung in the reception room by Baron Dillon. That wolf had reached the Grand Knight level treat. They paid the price with many elite footmen's lives and severe injuries of the 2 vassal knights in order to kill it. Demonized creatures were divided into ordinary species and savage species. The ordinary species was the demonized black bear that Kant had encountered. Its combat strength was nearly twice that of an ordinary black bear. And when it encountered savage species, these creatures were the true terror. Even the records of the Academy regarding demonized creatures claimed that if a troop encountered a savage demonized creature, if there were no Grand Knights, mages, or a certain number of elite troops and knights, then it was suggested to retreat immediately. Even some of them were left to die to stall for time, but it was better than all of them completely annihilated. However, these demonized creatures also had weaknesses. For example, they did not have the brains of humans, and they were far less intelligent and cunning as normal animals. They only relied on their strengthened bodies to fight fearlessly. Most importantly, it was absolutely impossible for different kinds of demonized creatures to join forces. If they encountered one, they would even kill each other. Even if they were the same kind of demonized creatures, not many of them would join forces together. As for the demonized creatures that did live in a pack, most of them were demonized wolves that used to group battle. As for the demonized black bear and demonized lion, most of them lived in solitary. However, even if they were solitary, their strengthened bodies were still much stronger than an ordinary troop class. In Kant's opinion, they were equivalent to or even higher than a level 5 troop class. 30 Sarandian horsemen seemed to be able to kill this demonized black bear easily. However, if there were only 5 of them, it might ended up differently. No wonder they say that the Sinway range is like a natural barrier. It seems that not only is the environment complicated and the difficult mountain paths, it is also due to these mass demonized creatures. Kant sighed in his heart. He lowered his head and pulled out 2 arrows from the demonized black bear's body. He looked at the wound, especially the chest. Although the scales were shattered, it was only stuck in between the flesh and bones of the chest. It did not penetrate too deep. It did not cause any fatal injuries at all. Are the arrows ineffective? Kant frowned slightly. When he thought about the ordinary bow in his hands and the archery skills that had not undergone much strengthening, he thought to himself, it should be because my skills are not good enough. The system only strengthened him with the body of a knight. In terms of skills, it strengthened the riding skills, close combat skills, long pole weapons, one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons, and so on. As for archery skills, Kant learned it when he was a young noble in the castle of Leo as his interest in hunting. His skills could not be considered strong. This battle bow from Baron Dillon was only used by ordinary archers. If a Ravenstern ranger held a heavy bow and used a cone arrow that could pierce armor, it would be a piece of cake for him to fight in this complicated and dangerous mountainous environment. After all, the Ravenstern kingdom was also guarding at the mountainous environment. The Misty Mountain was even more complicated than the Seenway range. Right, Kant was about to lead the team deeper into the mountain range and advance along the route given by the system. But he suddenly thought of something. He turned his head and instructed the Sarandian horseman behind him, use the scimitar to peel open the heart of this demonized black bear. There might be something special inside. Understood, one of the Sarandian horsemen nodded. He immediately pulled out the elite scimitar from his waist and aimed it at the ribs of the demonized black bear. As the pitch-black blood flowed out, a thick stench of blood spread in the air. The surrounding warhorse became even more restless. They shook their heads as if they were resisting this smell. Sarandian horseman took off his gloves and reached into the wound to feel for the heart. He quickly found the heart and pulled it out with a slight frown. His hand was dripping with blood, as if it was stained with a large number of stones. His companion beside him quickly handed him a piece of linen and asked him to wipe clean his arm and the black gemstone in his hand. The black gemstone was the size of an egg. It was wiped clean very quickly. Sarandian horseman handed the black gemstone to Kant. This is it, Kant frowned. In the book, it was recorded that there would be such a black gemstone in the heart of a demonized creature. If the demonized creature was killed, the black gemstone obtained from the corpse could be sold at a high price because of the mysterious mages in the Mage Tower. They would buy these things in large quantities, and they had no limit on purchasing it at all. The more they sold, the more reward they would get from these mages. But Kant thought of the elemental gemstone he obtained when he killed the elemental giant. Then he looked at the black gemstone now. There was a hunch in his heart, but he did not know how to say it. Perhaps this was related to extraordinary power. We'll talk about it later. Kant shook his head. This was not the time to think about this. On his retina, the route given by the system was still clear. Along the edge of the mountain forest, there was a path that could barely pass through by people, extending into the depths of the Seenway range. The destination seemed to be the top of a huge mountain. He raised his head and looked at the sky. The sun had already reached the top of his head, and it was close to noon. Let's keep walking. He did not stop. Instead, he urged the Sarandian horsemen behind him, everyone, be alert. We might encounter new demonized creatures at any time. Stay alert. Understood, the Sarandian horseman replied in a deep voice. The team continued to move forward. They went deep into the mountain range. Fortunately, they did not encounter any more demonized creatures. When Kant climbed over the mountain and walked on the rugged, complicated mountain path again and again, the route given by the system was about to reach an end. It was at the top of the mountain, right at the peak of the mountain. Howl! From a far distance deep in the Seenway range, a faint howl of a wolf could be heard. Kant was not surprised. It was a brutal howl of a wolf and it sounded full of energy. It was definitely a demonized wolf. However, judging from the faint sound, Kant knew that it was very far away from them. It would take a time to reach them, so there was no danger yet. Kant turned his head to look at the sparse woodland and shrubs around him. There were many rabbits, unknown birds, and even pheasants. He felt a little more calm. At least it was quiet here. Let's settle our lunch here and rest for an hour before we set off again. Kant instructed the Sarandian horsemen and arranged all sorts of miscellaneous tasks. Soon, the horsemen cleared out an empty space and found dried wood. They lit it with fire sickles and lit a bonfire. They also made a grill in the shortest time possible. 2 other Sarandian horsemen walked into the forest with bows and arrows. Soon, with a mess of birds flying, each of the 2 Sarandian horsemen came back with 6 pheasants. The other horsemen quickly bled and plucked the pheasants. The pheasants were placed on the bonfire and roasted quite neatly. As the meat turned golden, it was sprinkled with white salt and spices. The taste was excellent. They had a good lunch. The resources in the mountain area were much more abundant than those in the desert. Without the threat of the demonized creatures, the resources in the Sinway range would be enough to make the Stone Pass rich. After all, the fur of the wild beasts in the forest and other forest resources were already made silver coins. If they found minerals, they would be able to make even more money. It's dangerous. Kant looked up at the destination at the peak of the mountain and sighed slightly. He was also a little worried about setting up the village here. Kant had experienced the weakness of the village level before. Even the low-level Jack Allen could pose a threat to the village. If he had not fought with his life and walked out a bloody path, he would have become the white bones of the Oasis lookout. Where would he be today? He took a deep breath. Kant could only make the decision. He would first transfer troops from the Oasis lookout to assist in defense. Especially those Ravenstern Rangers and Ravenstern Wardens. They were the archers who were good at fighting in the mountains, were definitely more suitable for the environment here. After all, the Vaegirs archers were more suitable defending in the vast desert, while the Vaegir marksman's rain of arrows had a better effect in a large-scale warfare. Time's up. Kant used the soil under his feet to kick out the bonfire. After tidying up his clothes and equipment, he turned to the Sarandian horsemen and said, "Let's continue on our journey." Chapter 182, The Lost Ruins on the Mountain Peak. The sun was no longer as scorching as it was at noon. Kant led the team and continued forward. There was no road to walk through this undeveloped wild mountain. The only place they could move forward was the area where the mountain slope was relatively gradual. However, because they were still leading their warhorse, they must be more careful when they walked. They did not encounter any ferocious and terrifying demonized creatures along the way. However, Kant also found a lot of normal wild beasts around. They were similar to the sand gazelle that liked to go deep into the Naran desert, the forest wolves that lived in the Sinway range, and the slightly smaller black bear and a strong wild boar with fangs. In addition to the wild deer, rabbits, pheasants, and foxes that could be seen everywhere, the outer mountain range contained rich wildlife resources. Kant did not dare to imagine how many resources would be waiting for him to exploit further. The majestic mountain range was a natural barrier that hindered the communication between the two places. However, it was also a place that nurtured countless animals and plants. It might not be suitable for agriculture development, but just looked at all the resources at the Sinway range, the animal resources alone were enough for the development of a village. Black bear skin, wolf skin, fox skin, antelope skin, deer skin. These were all good furs for export and were very popular among the human countries, especially the tanned and dyed high-quality furs. They were also the high-quality clothes sought after by the noble families. A piece of fine clothing made of high-quality furs could be worth silver of the same weight. Once, Kant had a graceful white fox fur robe. But in the end, because he left the castle, he couldn't take it with him. Although it was one of his mother's relics, the final ownership was all belonged to his father Cameron. What Kant could take away were the ordinary clothes with little value, and the 20 great silver coins that he had saved. He didn't think too much about it. The memory of the past was a bit harsh, and it made Kant feel bitter in his heart. Now was the time for him to work hard. This was what he could truly do right now. Looking at the surrounding mountain range, looking at the lush vegetation, as well as the animals that hopped in and out from the dense forest and thickets, Kant's lips curled into a smile as he sighed from the bottom of his heart, this place is really not bad. He had made the right choice back then. Even though he had only gone deep into the Sinway range for half a day, the rich animal and plant resources had already moved him. Moreover, even the system had given him a route hint, which indirectly proved that his choice was correct. It was enough to prove that this mountain range was the best place to open up a new village. Of course, hidden demonized creatures in this mountain range that could appear at any time, it was indeed a big problem. Kant had a slight headache when he thought of this problem. I hope the Ravenstern Rangers can help to solve these things. Kant thought of the building in Trondheim, it made his face become a little calm. He needed to kill these demonized creatures as many as he could. Even if some of his soldiers died, as long as he trained a group of level 5 top-tier archers like the Ravenstern Rangers, that would be enough. They could even easily kill the elemental giants. Although these demonized creatures were ferocious, they were still flesh and blood. There was no way they could not do something, right? The bows used by the Rangers were the huge and powerful heavy bows. Compared to the long bows that the Voyagers liked to use because they pursued their shooting range, these Ravenstern people preferred to use heavy bows that pursued power. That way, they could kill any enemy within a short distance in the shortest time possible. At the critical moment, they could instantly make the enemy lose the ability to resist. This was the best choice they could make in such a complicated environment like the dense forests and mountains. They continued to lead the warhorse forward. The peak of the mountain was not far ahead, and they were about to reach their destination. The faces of the Sarandian horsemen were already stained with sweat. Even Kant, who had the body of a knight, was breathing slightly faster. His face was flushed red because of walking on the complicated mountain path. They had exhausted a lot of physical strength. There was no road at all in the strange and wild mountain range, so it is not as easy as traveling on the soft sand in the desert. If it wasn't for the cold weather in Sinway range due to the faint cold current from the underground, Kant and his soldiers would have a harder time trekking through the mountains. At this moment, Kant thought of the Rhodok people. These mountain people who also lived in the Rhodok's mountain area might be the same as the people of Ravenstern. They had sufficient adaptability to the mountain range environment. After all, they grew up in the mountainous region. My lord. While they were walking, the Sarandian horseman suddenly spoke. Kant frowned and clenched the knight sword in his hand. Subconsciously, his eyes scanned the surroundings cautiously, but he didn't find any danger. He couldn't help but ask in a deep voice, "What's going on? Did you find anything unusual?" "Under the foot," Sarandian horseman said. "What foot?" Kant lowered his head, but his pupils shrank slightly. "This is..." Under his exquisite cowhide boots, there were stone slabs appeared on the rugged hillside. The stone slabs extended one after another along the mountain slabs, all the way to the peak of the mountain 100 meters away. It was like a staircase. Kant's expression was solemn. He clenched the knight sword in his hand tightly. This was not like a staircase. These stone slabs covered by a large amount of soil and fallen leaves were the stairs leading to the peak of the mountain. How is this possible? Slowly exhaling, Kant stared at the peak of the mountain in front of him. According to the route he took, he did not find any other places with such buildings as stairs. Kant had never read about any forces at the border of the Naran Desert and the Sinway range in the library of the Academy and in the study room of the Castle of Leo. Especially with the lofty and magnificent Sinway range, crossing the mountain range from the direction of the Dukedom of Leo was extremely dangerous. Even without the threat of demonized creatures, the mountain was still fraught with all kinds of dangers. Instead of establishing such a hidden force in the mountains north of the Sinway range, it would be easier to establish it in the south. "Lord," looking at these stone slabs, it should be over 1,000 years old. Sarandian horseman suddenly opened his mouth. He slightly squatted down and knocked on the stone slab. It was full of potholes and had been weathered quite badly. However, he could vaguely see the excellent technique used to cut the stone. He could not help but speculate, it was not built in recent years. Thousands of years, Kant frowned. This was an incredible number. It was even longer than the founding of the Dukedom of Leo. The Dukedom of Leo had been established for less than 300 years since the first Grand Duke of Leo. Its first 50 years belonged to a separatist warlord force of a dying kingdom. It must be thousands of years. Sarandian horseman nodded and said, in the Sarandian desert, there are also ancient ruins. According to the scholar's assumption, some of them are even older than the Karadia Empire. Is that so? Kant's brows were still tightly furrowed. The origin of the continent of Karadia was the Karadia Empire. Be it the kingdom of Swadia, the kingdom of Rhodok, the kingdom of Vaigirs, the Kyrgyz Khanate, the kingdom of Saran Sultanate, or the kingdom of Nords, which was a foreign merchant at the time, they were all part of this massive empire. And the Karadia Empire might be the first empire to unify the mainland. But right before the empire, there were countless forces that had existed, each leaving their ruins in certain areas. What the Sarandian horseman was talking about was the ruins left behind by the desert people who had lived in the Sarandian desert in ancient times. After thousands of years of decay, there were still some traces left behind. Just like the stone stairs leading to the peak in front of Kant. Stay alert. Kant took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, let's go up and take a look. Since they had discovered it, they had to go up. Moreover, the route on the retina indicated the peak of the mountain. Even if it was a dragon's den or a tiger's den, Kant had to go over and take a look before he could feel at ease. Otherwise, wouldn't the system's instructions be in vain? The group maintained their vigilance and quickly walked up the stone stairs to the top of the mountain. This is... Kant was slightly stunned when the expectation of a desolate mountain peak did not appear. How is this possible? The eyes of the Sarandian horseman behind him also widened in surprise. It was right at the top of the mountain in front of them. It was not a dense forest, nor was it a lush thicket, nor was it a desolate land filled with weeds. When Kant and the others came to a corner of the mountain peak and really saw the whole picture, they realized that this was of thousands of acres of flat land. Moreover, it was full of collapsed stone buildings. After countless years of erosion, there were dense shrubs wrapped around the collapsed huge stones. However, Kant could still see the faint patterns on these stones. They had a mysterious and exquisite appearance. Through thousands of years, they brought to anyone who came, displaying the glory that originated from them. The patterns were still somewhat familiar. This is the ruins of the lost city. Kant swallowed his saliva and looked at this building. Because right in the center, in the middle of the area where countless huge stones had collapsed and fallen, countless shrubs and vines were twining around an even large stone pillar. It seemed to be a human body, and it was wearing a unique armor. It was holding a circular plate that looked like it was emitting sunlight, as if it was once receiving the scorching sun in the sky. At this moment, Kant finally knew why the patterns on the stone pillar were so familiar. Even the circular plate held high in the hand of the stone pillar gave him a familiar feeling. That was because this was the lost city. In the legend, the city was cast in gold, and it housed the bloodline of a god. It represented the inheritance of the sun god, the lost city, the holy city of gold. The fascinating legend that appealed countless people was right in front of Kant. And the one that came was even more impressive than the sun disk that was found in the well. Because this was a real relic. Roar! But just as Kant and the others were shocked, a violent and crazy roar came from the ruins. A faint sound wave came. Kant's eardrums were hurting slightly. In between in the ruins, there was a 3-meter-tall black lion which was even stronger and more ferocious than the demonized black bear. It was stepping on the scattered giant stones and propping up the thick black mane on its neck. It slowly walked toward Kant and the others, and its pitch-black eyes were filled with the most terrifying brutal killing intent. This is... Kant gritted his teeth in disbelief and squeezed out, demonized lion. Savage species. Chapter 183, An extremely fierce battle. The savage species among the demonized creatures were comparable to grand knights. Kant's breathing was a little hurried. He clenched his knight sword tightly. The 30 Sarandian horsemen came to his back, but they did not stand in a dense formation. Instead, they were slightly scattered. They also sensed that this 4-meter-tall demonized lion, which was even larger than the demonized black bear, was an even more terrifying demonized creature. If they continued to fight in a dense formation, they would be blown away by the first attack. In fact, these Sarandian horsemen were already prepared for casualties. As for the Sarandian war horses, they had already collapsed on the ground with trembling legs due to the horrific appearance of the demonized lion. Their lower abdomen was oozing with stick urine. They did not move at all, as if they had accepted their fate. They were so intimidated by the pressure of the demonized creature that they did not even dare to run away. Roar! The ferocious demonized lion opened its mouth wide and putrid black gas spewed out from its throat. Its pair of scarlet eyes were filled with brutality and malevolence. It lowered its thick limbs and charged with its huge body in an instant. With the sound of the strong wind, it howled as it ran on the collapsed boulders towards Kant and the rest. Spread out, Kant ordered in a deep voice. The formation formed by the Sarandian horsemen spread out to both sides. They held a shield in their left hand, and a spear in their right. However, before they could completely spread out, forming a two-line pincer formation, the gigantic demonized lion had already appeared in front of them. As it ran, it let out a low roar that sounded like a demon's voice. With a wave of its sharp claws, the 2 Sarandian horsemen who could not dodge in time revealed a determined expression. They could not dodge, then they could only choose to block. "Raise your shields," they groaned, as if they were cheering themselves on. However, they were instantly struck by a huge force on the Sarandian shield on their left arm. Immediately after that, the shields was smashed onto their chests. Their entire bodies felt like they had been hit by a huge rock thrown by a trebuchet. Their faces instantly flushed red, and their entire bodies were sent flying backwards along with their broken breastbones. Bang! Bang! The 2 of them crashed heavily into the bushes by the side. They finally stopped rolling after crashing into the stone pillar. They were still struggling slightly. But in the end, as their pupils dilated, their arms drooped down and lost all signs of life. It was clear that under the attack of this demonized lion, even if the 2 of them had made a reasonable defensive move, they were still blown away by that huge force. It had caused an extremely serious and fatal internal injury. "Spread out, be careful." Kant's breathing quickened as he reminded in a deep voice. When he glanced at the shields on the left arm of the 2 Sarandian horsemen, there were already deep scratches on the shields. Under this attack, the entire shield had already been destroyed. Even if it was repaired, it would not be able to return to its original defensive effect. It could only be reported as damaged equipment and redistributed a new one by the system. After the equipment was damaged, it would cost dinar to repair it. However, Kant was not worried about dinar. It was the 2 level 4 cavalries who had followed him through life and death, but they were easily killed by this demonized lion. They did not even have the time to react. This vicious demonized creature. Wasn't it too terrifying? However, just as Kant's thoughts were spinning, the huge demonized lion roared in a low voice. Its scarlet eyes were aimed to the side, and its 4 limbs burst forth once again. It continued to swing out its sharp claws. Amidst the fierce wind, its claws that were as sharp as scimitars finally shocked the Sarandian horsemen who could not dodge in time. Kant and the others finally understood. How did the Sarandian shield on the left arm of the 2 Sarandian horsemen break? In front of this huge force and sharp claws, not to mention the Sarandian shield made of wood, leather, and iron nails, even the exquisite mail armor would be torn to pieces. Arg! Another 2 Sarandian horsemen were sent flying in an instant. Their bodies fell heavily to the ground a few meters away like human sandbags. Even if they managed to survive and struggled to stand up, their twisted limbs already indicated that they were unable to participate in the following battle. Kant quickly retreated. The other Sarandian horsemen continued to hold their shields and spears, their faces looked grim. In a short moment, 4 of their companions were killed. However, that ferocious demonic lion was still unharmed. This battle loss was far too terrifying. To them, the current battle was already in danger of losing, or even being completely annihilated. Roar! That demonic lion roared. However, its huge body did not continue to pounce. Instead, it slowly walked towards the Sarandian horseman who was still alive, but was already heavily injured. It bared its short sword like sharp teeth and slowly lowered its head, followed by a miserable howl ended in abrupt. Its mouth was filled with blood. Damn it, Kant gritted his teeth. His chest was already burning with anger. The other Sarandian horsemen's eyes were filled with anger. That demonized lion actually ate their heavily injured companion in front of them. It completely ignored them and treated them like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Kant was even more furious. Because he was the Lord, and the corpse in the mouth of that demonized lion was his soldier. Kant could execute any soldier he disliked for any reason. But he absolutely could not allow this demonized lion to plunder his soldiers in front of him, just like how he did in his own vegetable garden. This was equal to provocation, equal to contempt. Kill him! Kant's voice rang out, and he walked quickly. The remaining 26 Sarandian horsemen held spears in their hands, stared with their eyes wide open and gritted their teeth. They charged at the demonized lion in a straight sprint, venting the anger in their hearts. Roar! The demonized lion chewed the innards and twisted horseman's body. Its body was huge, yet it was extremely agile. It let out a mocking roar and jumped around, dodging the spears. Just as the Sarandian horseman wanted to continue stabbing, its body crashed into them. With the black snake-like scales on its chest, it did not care the spears at all. Crack! Several scales were pierced through, and pitch-black blood splattered everywhere. However, 3 Sarandian horsemen were suddenly sent flying backwards. The Sarandian armor on their chests shattered, and there were 3 scratches marks on them. Fresh blood seeped out, and there was also that ghastly white breastbone. 7 of the Sarandian horsemen had already died in battle. Go! Kant did not care. At this moment, they could no longer care about casualties. If they retreated, they would definitely be hunted down until they were completely annihilated. They could only grit their teeth and fight. This was a complicated mountainous environment. Having trekked for half a day, they had already expended a lot of stamina. If they were to compete mountain climbing speed with this 4-legged demonic lion, it would be no different from courting death. Sarandian horsemen also understood this principle. They stabbed out their spears ferociously. Whether it was its abdomen or its back, they no longer cared about his vital parts. As long as they could injure this demonized lion, it would be fine. But their intention was harder to achieve. The demonized lion tossed and turned. Its huge body rammed left and right. Its tail whipped like an iron whip, making a bang-bang sound when it hit the shields. For a moment, they actually found it difficult to get close. Kant held the night sword in his hand, his expression was very bad. He dodged the demonized lion's claws. He was able to survive until now thanks to the strong body of the Swadian knight, as well as the killing techniques instilled by the system. There was also the desperate protection from the Sarandian horsemen. Roar! The demonized lion also sensed the stalemate, and it let out a violent roar. The scarlet in its eyes became even more intense. It had never encountered a creature that resisted so much. It could not help but roar angrily, and the mane on its entire neck spiked. An even more terrifying sound wave instantly exploded throughout the surroundings. Its roar was as loud as rolling thunder, it shook the surrounding Sarandian horsemen's eardrums so much that they felt as if their eardrums were about to burst, and their heads felt a little dizzy. Kant was the same. He even felt as if the sky and earth were spinning. This rolling sound wave had destroyed their control of balance. Sizzle. However, the demonized lion used this opportunity to burst. It swung its 2 claws violently, and bit with its mouths full of razor-sharp teeth. In a short moment, at least 5 Sarandian horsemen were instantly sent flying. Half of the bodies of the 2 riders were bitten until they were into pieces. Even the Sarandian mail armor did not stop the blade-like sharp teeth from biting. Just like an ordinary person chewing on a peanut, as the sharp teeth bit down, a large amount of blood and internal organs flowed along with the broken chain armor. It was like his entire body had been cut in half, and he let out a mournful howl. However, as the Sarandian horseman let out a mournful howl, Kant actually recovered from that muddled dizziness. Damn it! Kant gritted his teeth in anger. Almost at hand, the demonized lion was wreaking havoc among the other Sarandian horsemen. Kant gripped his sword tightly, he thrust it at the flank in front of him. Poof! The knight sword went straight into the ribs of the demonized lion. But it seemed like the lion contracted the muscles around its rib, the sword couldn't penetrate deeper no matter how hard he stabbed. It caused a relatively serious skin injury, but it was not an effective fatal injury. Roar! The demonized lion felt the pain and turned its head frantically. Its entire claw swatted away another Sarandian horseman who could not dodge in time. A foul stench spewed out from its mouth, and its mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth was about to bite Kant. Follow me, stab straight. However, the Sarandian horsemen on both sides had also recovered. Seeing that their lord was in danger, they roared furiously and did not care about their own safety at all. They raised their spear and stabbed heavily into the demonized lion's mouth. Even the tip of the spear pierced through the lion's side cheek, stabbing straight into the mouth. Black blood flowed out from its cheek, making the demonized lion even more outrageous. Attack the vital points. The eyes, ears, and the inside of the mouth. Kant took the opportunity to retreat. His breathing was extremely rapid, but the knight sword in his hand turned around and stabbed at the ear of the demonized lion. As the sharp tip of the sword pierced into the head, the ear of the demonized lion was pierced through. Clearly, this was also its vital point. The Sarandian horsemen also listened to his orders. Even without the spear in their hands, they still drew their elite scimitars and slashed at the demonized lion, leaving deep cuts on the pitch-black scales and caused blood to splash out. Pu. More of the Sarandian horsemen used the spears in their hands to pierce through the demonized lion. They did not care about their own safety at all. The tip of the spear pierced through the parts that did not have scales. One of the Sarandian horsemen let out his strength to use the spear in his hand pierced deeply through the demonized lions. Chapter 184, The New Sun Disk. Roar! The demonic let out a mournful roar. Covered in pitch-black blood, it finally felt that something was wrong. It continued to blow away 3 Sarandian horsemen with its paws. It turned around, wanting to get rid of these monkey-like creatures. However, it realized that it could not walk at all because its robust limbs had already been slashed by the elite scimitar, causing blood to flow all over the ground. Even the tendons on the back of its right leg had been destroyed by the elite scimitar. As the demonized lion used its strength, the tendons on its right leg were instantly broke. It let out a miserable howl as it limped out of the horseman encirclement. However, as it charged out of the encirclement, it was still wantonly slaughtering. No Sarandian horseman could withstand the strike of this vicious demonized lion. The shield was smashed into pieces. The chainmail was torn apart. Even the spears were broken and the scimitars were bent. The Sarandian horsemen suffered heavy losses. In a short moment, there were only less than 15 Sarandian horsemen still standing beside Kant. Kill! Kant's eyes were filled with bloodshot. His face became even more ferocious. If he did not kill this demonized lion, he would not be able to sleep or eat in peace. His feet moved quickly, and he was still stabbing the demonized lion mercilessly with his knight's sword. From the bottom up, he quickly approached the throat of the demonized lion under the cover of Sarandian horsemen. He gritted his teeth and let out all his force, cutting a deep wound on the demonized lion. Pitch-black blood instantly spilled out, causing the limping demonized lion to become even more violent. However, the fury of this demonized lion was no longer as fierce as before. The spear that pierced directly into its large intestine was still in its body. Every time it made a big and vigorous movement, the sharp tip of the spear in its body would destroy its intestines and lower abdomen. Roar! The pain caused the demonized lion to let out a low roar. But its movements became slower and slower. Sarandian horsemen seized the opportunity and surrounded the demonized lion on all sides. As if they had a tacit understanding, they gritted their teeth and ran straight towards it. Borrowing the inertia of running, they charged forward ruthlessly and used their spear to stab the demonized lion from all four directions. Moreover, they specifically stabbed into its body that did not have any scales to defend it. The soft abdomen on its both sides was directly pierced through. The intestines suffered even more damage, causing the demonized lion to roar in anger as it pounced forward. It pounced on three Sarandian who could not dodge in time, viciously biting down with its sharp teeth, chewing on the body with the of the chain mail. Its scarlet eyes became more terrifying. This demonized lion also seems to understand its situation, began to more and more desperate. Now it's scarred. Scimitar marks on the cheeks, holes penetrated by spears, black blood dripping down, but it still used its last strength to kill more Sarandian horsemen. This kind of demonized creature had a tenacious vitality to begin with. If it was an ordinary demonized creature, it might be killed by utilizing exquisite techniques. But this kind of savage creature was as strong as a Grand Knight's strength and vitality. It required Knight-level warriors to engage in close combat and sacrificed their lives in order to kill it. Just like now. The entire mountain peak was already filled with the thick smell of blood. The 30 Sarandian horsemen that they brought along were easily killed by this ferocious demonic lion. Only 12 of them were still standing on the mountain peak. In addition to Kant, a lord who had been wandering around, took the opportunity to stab it with his sword. Roar, roar! The demonic lion panted heavily as its bowl-like eyes swept over Kant. It was not without intelligence. Although its brutal nature engulfed its soul and its powerful strength made it not need to use its previous cunning techniques, it still had the instinct to take the lead in killing the leader of the enemy and obtain the final victory. Damn it, when Kant saw that scarlet eyes were aimed at him, the fear gripped his heart. How could he not understand the meaning of its gaze? It was a desperate struggle. It was a rage that wanted to tear him apart. The demonized lion did not give him time to think. It gathered its final strength on the other three-legged claws that had yet to be crippled. It rushed over violently and waved its claws, wanting to press Kant's entire body under it, then used its big mouth filled with sharp teeth to swallow the young prey who brought it great pain. It wanted to swallow its prey into its stomach. Roar, an angry roar was rolling along with a gust of wind. Kant clenched the knight sword in his hand tightly. His heart was like being squeezed at this moment, but his mind was extremely clear. Time seemed to slow down. The body of the Swadian knight, along with the extreme desire for survival in his heart, gave him the power to tear space and time apart. Under the attack of the demonized lion, he knelt heavily on the ground with both legs, lowering his head and bending his waist as if he was kowtowing. He nearly avoided the huge body that pounced at him. Plop, plop, plop. The earth seemed to tremble slightly as the huge body pounced down. 2 Sarandian horsemen who were originally supporting Kant were directly pressed to the ground by the 2 huge claws. Their eyes protruded out and their sternum were completely shattered. They let out their last breaths. They were directly pressed to death on the spot. Kill. However, the other Sarandian horsemen did not let go of this opportunity. They continued stabbed their spears forward. Those who did not have a spear pulled out the elite scimitars in their hands and continued to slash viciously at the limbs of this demonized lion. They aimed directly at the tendons in the leg, in order to cripple the mobility of this demonized lion. No matter how powerful this demonized lion was, without its speed, it was equivalent to a fish meat that was waiting to be sliced up. Pu. Its black fur was cut off by the sharp scimitar. As for the tendons of its legs, which were not protected by its bones or muscles, it was instantly destroyed. Several deep cuts were made by the scimitars. As the demonized lion felt pain, it roared angrily and used its strength to turn around, which then directly breaking its body. Its two hind legs instantly fell down, and the speed of the demonized lion instantly slowed down. The tendons on both legs were cut off, and it no longer had the ability to run and jump. Just its two front claws. No matter how strong it was, it could not hurt the remaining Sarandian horsemen's lives anymore. It could only let out a low growl to vent the violent rage in its heart. The demonized creature did not know how to surrender. Kant would not let it surrender either. With the help of the two Sarandian horsemen, Kant stood up. His hands were trembling from the extreme action just now. He was pumped with adrenaline, and now he suffered rapid decline in spirit and physical strength. "My lord," one of the Sarandian horsemen asked, "do you want to kill it yourself?" "You guys do it," Kant waved his hand. He swept his gaze across the battlefield beside him. More than 20 broken corpses of the Sarandian horsemen were scattered all over the mountain peak and the ruins. His expressions turned somber. "I think you guys hate it more." "I'm willing to serve." The two supporting Sarandian horsemen nodded. There were only 7 of them left. They looked at each other. Other than the 2 who were supporting Kant, the other 5 picked up the spears of their fallen comrades. Looking at the demonized lion that was still crawling on the ground with its claws, ferociously revealing its fearsome appearance, they ran up and brutally stabbed at it. The tip of the spear easily pierced through the eyes, the pupils, and the eye sockets. It pierced through its eye sockets and directly into the brain. The left and right eyes were each pierced by a spear. This was the revenge of the Sarandian horsemen for their comrades, including the spear that pierced through the ear canals in the left and right ears. Then, they ruthlessly pierced through its ribs, deeply piercing into the chest. The spear pierced through the heart that was still beating rapidly. The 5 of them worked together, and the already heavily injured demonized lion instantly died. The battle ended. Kant watched this scene coldly. The thick smell of blood made him frown slightly. He gritted his teeth and ordered, "Clean up the battlefield." Kant opened his mouth, and his tone was a little solemn and depressed. He said in a deep voice, "Dig a grave for the dead Sarandian horsemen. If they die here, then they will also be here to guard our new village." "Understood," the remaining 7 Sarandian horsemen nodded. They did not choose to rest directly. Instead, they went to carry the bodies of their dead comrades. They understood Kant's meaning. The dead Sarandian horsemen deserved a decent burial. But Kant took a step forward. The route shown on his retina was not the edge of the mountain, but deeper, inside the collapsed boulder, deeper into the mountain. At the center of the ruins. At the spot where the stone statue had fallen. Ding! Side quest issued. Side quest, explore the ruins. Reward, building transfer card, can change the location of a building. Introduction, you have arrived at the mountain peak and found the remains of this building buried by vegetation. After your careful observation, even though time had made the remains of the building look like ruins, its former glory could still be shown through the remaining decorations and construction methods. Please explore carefully, perhaps you can find more. The system's temporary side quest was suddenly released. Kant nodded slightly. Got it. He himself wanted to explore the ruins. The ruins of the lost city. He was very sure. When he followed the collapsed boulder and entered the building ruins from the direction of the main gate, the stone statue wrapped in vines was revealed in the center of his eyes. Especially the circular plate in the center that was lifted by the 2 arms. Although it had a radiation pattern, Kant still found something at the center of the circular plate with radiation pattern. There was a faint golden glowing under the cover of dust and soil, as if there was a different kind of golden object embedded on it. The sun circular plate. Kant's mind instantly recalled the golden circular plate he had in the Oasis lookout. He carefully scanned his surroundings. In the corner of the ruins, there were countless piles of bones. It seemed to be the lair of the demonized lion. After making sure that there was no other danger, Kant slowly walked forward, holding his knight sword tightly, and came to the side of the slanted stone statue. Ding system prompt. Council hall can be built here, and a new village can be built here. A dialog box popped up on the system's retina. At the same time, the route that was displayed was also disappeared. Chapter 185, All Forces of the System. Ding system prompt. Council hall can be built here. New village can be built here. As Kant approached the final location of the route, the system immediately popped up a dialog box and displayed it on his retina. The route that the system had instructed disappeared. This proved that Kant's second village could be built here. However, he was not in a hurry to build the council hall. The ruins at the peak of the mountain were still in an unknown status. Kant needed to complete the system quest to explore the ruins and make sure that there was no danger before he could set up the council hall without worry. After all, this was Kant's second stronghold. He had to be careful. Kant held his knight sword and slowly walked to the stone statue. The huge stones that were once used for construction had all collapsed and sunk into the soil at mountain peak. Only this stone statue was still half exposed in the soil. It raised the circular plates in its hands and was covered in shrubs and vines. It seemed like a decadent garden art. Kant raised his eyebrows slightly. Kant had already noticed the huge size of these stones and stone statues. The part of the stone that exposed from the soil was only a dozen centimeters shorter than his height of 1.8 meters. This was not including the part beneath the soil layer. There was also this other stone statue. The waist part of the stone statue was exposed from the soil. It was 4 meters tall and wore an ancient-style armor. The stone plate with radial-shaped edges was held high in its hands. Due to the collapse, its angle was slanted. Kant could just see the center of the stone plate, which was about 2 meters in diameter, with a golden disc embedded in it. Kant was very familiar with it. He had once obtained the same model, which represented the ruins of the lost city. The sun disk. It was still located at the top of the clock tower of the Oasis lookout. During the day, it absorbed the heat from the sun, and at night, it released the heat from the sunday. It balanced the temperature within a 500-meter radius, giving people a comfortable and livable feeling. At this moment, the system dialog box suddenly popped up on his retina. Ding! Special quest issued. Special quest, familiar strange object. Reward, 5 honor points. Introduction, you have found a strange object that looked familiar. It still gives off a mysterious special energy. This energy is helpful for the system to analyze the rules of this world. Would you like to let the system absorb it? Remark, after the system absorbs it, it will power up. Yes/no, let the system absorbs the item? Special quest. Kant raised his head subconsciously and looked at the sun disk that was made of gold on the stone plate. He did not hesitate at all. Absorb. This was the system's requirement. Kant would not hinder it. Moreover, they had been together for so long, how could Kant not understand the system's nature? Even if the system absorbed this strange item, it would definitely be picked out in a side quest or a system lottery. Moreover, after the sun disk had been analyzed by the system, he could easily use it by using his mind alone. For example, the page of clear spring and page of fertile soil were 2 such items. Most importantly, there were still those 5 honor points. This represented the system mall's lottery. Even though there was definitely a sun disk in it, the other 4 gift packs were all picked up for free. Why would Kant hesitate? He would not hesitate. The system's data flowed out and circulated on his palm. He looked up at the tilted stone statue. Kant understood that the system had told him to go up and place his palm on the sun disk. He waved his night sword and cut off the branches of the shrubs and vines. He immediately jumped onto the body of the stone statue like a cheetah and quickly climbed to the top of both hands. His leather boots stepped on the chest of the stone statue that was covered in dust and mud, then he took another step on the head of the stone statue that was covered in moss. His left hand that was filled with data flow and he directly imprinted it onto the sun disk. A faint spatial fluctuation instantly started to flicker. Some mysterious power seemed to have been activated. On the golden sun disk, the mysterious sacred sun pattern instantly exploded with balls of golden light. Kant was at the top of the stone statue, and felt like he was standing under the scorching noon sun. The heat wave started to sweep over, and it actually felt hotter and hotter. It was as uncomfortable as being in an oven. However, this high temperature instantly disappeared along with the spread of the data flow in his left hand. As the faint mountain wind blew, it was still the usual climate of the cool Sinway range. It was like the heat wave just now was an illusion of his perception. However, when Kant opened his eyes again, the sun disk that originally existed in the stone disk had been completely devoured by the data chain that flowed out from the system. There was no trace of it, not even a bit of gold was left. There was only a 2-centimeter inlaid pit, indicating that it was once at the center of the stone disk. There was an object with a diameter of about 1.5 meters embedded in it. Kant understood that the sun disk had been absorbed by the system. But at this moment, the stone statue under his feet suddenly shook. Even the huge rocks around it that had collapsed with a certain rhythm to them, along with some mysterious fluctuations in space. Not good, is there an earthquake? This bad thought appeared in Kant's mind, and he immediately jumped off the stone statue. Just as his 2 feet touched the ground, that mysterious trembling and fluctuation was instantly stimulated. In Kant's eyes, the huge stone with the clear sacred sun pattern and the exquisitely carved stone statue beside him seemed to have been turned into powder. It was like these stones and statue had been through thousands of years in just a few breaths, and eventually turned into powder. Even the stone slabs under his feet were mixed with the soil on the ground. As the mountain wind blew, the magnificent and mysterious ruins on the peak of the mountain disappeared. It was like a breeze blowing past, never to be seen again. Only a little stone powder and soil were left on the ground. There were also strange-looking vines and bushes lying on the ground because they had lost their support. "My lord!" The remaining 7 Sarandian horsemen rushed over quickly. They looked at the flat and empty peak with shock and doubt in their eyes. They clenched the scimitars in their hands tightly, clearly not understanding what had happened here. The majestic ruins just a moment ago had actually vanished without a trace in the blink of an eye. They definitely could not maintain their composure. "Relax, there isn't any danger. Just remain cautious." Kant's face was calm. He continued to instruct the 7 Sarandian horsemen, after cleaning up the battlefield, inspect this mountain peak. After confirming that there isn't any danger, stand by and watch the surroundings. "Yes, my lord." The 7 Sarandian horsemen nodded and quickly dispersed to follow the order to check the mountain peak. There were thousands of acres of flat land on the mountain peak. Although it was overgrown with weeds, shrubs, and a lot of woodland, it was definitely flat land. Not to mention building a village, these thousands of acres of land were more than enough for farming. A mysterious and perfect mountain flat land. In front of Kant's eyes, a dialog box popped up on his retina again. Ding! After your tireless efforts, the side quest has been completed. Side quest, exploring the ruins has been completed. Reward, building transfer card, able to change the location of a building. Introduction, during your exploration of the ruins, you discovered a mysterious strange object. What a pleasant surprise! You look at the flat land around you with full confidence and feel that there is something you can do with it. A golden card appeared in his mind. Kant raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled. Construction transfer card? Not bad. He scanned through the introduction of the card. Kant understood. This construction transfer card could transform any building that had been built into a construction card and move it to another area for construction. Of course, the prerequisite was that it had to be moved within the sphere of influence of the council hall. The ranger camp was the best transfer building. With the Viegier's shooting range, Trondheim had wasted resources on the recruitment of the long-range troop class. Kant did not need to recruit a large number of archers in this Oasis lookout fortress, he did not need 2 different archers. This was undoubtedly a conflict. However, the new village in the Seenway range definitely needed long-range archers who were good at mountain battles. These were the Ravenstern Wardens. From the literal meaning, it could be seen that the Wardens themselves were excellent archers in the mountain and forest areas. Their strength can be fully seen by the time they in charge of killing those barbarians in the Misty Mountain. Now, it's time to build the village. Kant took a deep breath. He communicated with the mind communication system and said in a deep voice, "System, build the council hall here." In his mind, the card representing the council hall instantly appeared. Some faint golden ray condensed. At the densest moment, it instantly turned into a golden light. If one looked carefully, they would find that it was the subtle data stream. Ding system prompt. Detected that there is already a council hall. The force is the Kingdom of Swadia. Its level is fortress level. This time, the construction of the council hall will be chosen along with random forces. The level will be village level. Yes/no? Yes, Kant made his choice. The system had already warned him about this. The system dialog box instantly refreshed. A new prompt box appeared. Ding system prompt. Random selection of forces. Please pause at will. On the retina before his eyes, the dialog box directly turned into a disk. Countless names of forces appeared densely on it. Although he was relatively small, as Kant swept through it, he could vaguely see many familiar names. Kingdom of Swadia, Kingdom of Rhodoks, Kingdom of Nords, Kingdom of Viegirs, Kingdom of Saran Sultanate, Kingdom of Sarleon, Kingdom of Ravenstern, Kingdom of Fiertzvane, Dasha Tribe, Imperial Expeditionary Force, Jeta Tribe, Nolder Elven Force. Even the Great Ming Empire, Jurchen of Manchu, Mongolian Golden Family, Great Han Empire, Hunnic Empire, Oda Nobunaga, Nagao Kage Tora, countries of Southern Europe, Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, and even the Middle East. All ages, all regions, all kinds of formal history or alternate history, or fantasy world. All existed on this disk. This was the forces that contained in all of the mods from the entire Mount and Blade series. Kant took a deep breath. The disk was spinning. The name of the forces on it was no longer clear. He was calm. Stop. Following his words, the disk came to an abrupt stop. The red pointer was aimed at the name of a certain force on the disk. Ding system prompt. Congratulations on obtaining. Chapter 186, Aran Village of Rhodok. Ding system prompt. Congratulations on obtaining the Kingdom of Rhodok's Council Hall. The system dialog box appeared on his retina. Kant was slightly stunned. Who would have known that it was the Council Hall of the Kingdom of Rhodoks? This was the Kingdom of Brown Bears, which was built in the southwest mountains of the continent of Karadia. Kant watched as the council hall in his retina reassembled into a card. However, on the golden pattern of the card, a burly and majestic brown bear flag appeared. The corners of his mouth could not help but curl into a bitter smile. This was expected. But it was also unexpected. The system gave the location of the village in the Seenway range, and Kant guessed that it was probably a mountain country. He quickly estimated the result. The Kingdom of Rhodoks, the Kingdom of Ravenstone, the Kingdom of Dwarf Humans, and the Kingdom of Forest Elves. Of course. The last two non-human forces were a little far away. However, the Kingdom of Rhodoks and the Kingdom of Ravenstone were probably the strongest according to Kant's estimations. After all, the Kingdom of Rhodoks was the original one. In terms of kinship, they could even contact the kingdom of Swadia. After all, these two countries were of the same species. It was their contrasting living environments that caused them to split, and the split didn't even last long. It was during the term of the current king of Swadia, Heraus, the kingdom of Rhodok was exploited and taxed due to the king's obsession with tributes and negligence of protocol, that resulted in the appearance of the kingdom of Rhodok. But it's good. Kant nodded, and his expression returned calm. There were only two ways to level up in the kingdom of Rhodok. Close combat. Their defense was astonishing, and their close combat was second only to the kingdom of Nord's Rhodok. Long range. The Rhodoks, who were said to be the strongest snipers, held a city-breaking crossbow in his hand, and could pierce through steel shields with a single arrow. It was a military structure that was specially matched with the mountainous terrain. Even the Swadian knight, who was invincible on the plains, and the Mamluk, who was invincible in the desert, were not a match for the kingdom of Rhodok in the mountainous region. As long as the troops of the kingdom of Rhodok formed a dense formation, borrowing the advantage of the steep mountain terrain, and under the protection of the infantrymen armed with heavy shields and wearing heavy chain armor, allowing the snipers of the kingdom of Rhodok armed with siege crossbows to fire as much as they wanted, even the unrivaled guards of the Nord royal family would suffer in this complex mountain terrain. They were the undisputed overlords of the mountain region, although they did not have cavalry. However, the mountain region, which was undulating and densely covered with forests, did not need cavalry to defend. Kant led 30 Sarandian horsemen into the Sinway range. These assault cavalry, who were originally invincible in the Sarandian desert, suffered heavy losses because they left their warhorse, which they were best at, and used unfamiliar foot combat to face the enemy. 30 people were easily slaughtered by the ferocious demonic lion. In the end, there were only 7 people left. If there were 30 corresponding level 4 infantrymen. For example, the Swadian infantry would definitely not have won so miserably. This was because of the characteristics of the troop class. Sarandian horsemen were good at charging in the desert. They were an extremely mobile cavalry. Coming to the mountain area was equivalent to giving up their best mobility and not charging on horseback. Instead, they became a weak force in close combat. Now Kant had the council hall of the kingdom of Rhodok. To be able to recruit this elite mountain battle force with the brown bear as its banner, he would be completely unafraid of the complex terrain of the Sinway Mountains. For example, according to Kant's understanding, the level 4 infantrymen of Rhodok were veteran lance wielders. They wore heavy chain armor with excellent defense profile, carried a broad shield with stronger defensive effects, and held armor-piercing, one-handed military hammers that could be used to blunt and stab. They also held, with 2 hands, long-hilted broadswords that was more than 2 meters long, and their attack was extremely powerful. And even among those of the same level. Among the level 4 infantrymen, the veteran spear-bearers of Rhodok was the strongest. The same level of Swadian infantry, Waigea infantry, Nord warriors, and Salander infantry would all be chopped down by these level 4 infantrymen of the kingdom of Rhodok. The veteran spear-bearers of Rhodok, with the long-hilted broadsword in their hands, would definitely make people scurry like rats, unable to stand against them. Although they were spear-wielders, these infantry soldiers used extremely powerful long-hilted broadswords. The kind that could even shatter light shields. And it wasn't just the infantry. The marksmen were also astonishingly fierce. Being a long-range troop class that also used crossbowmen, Swadian used a light crossbow, a level 4 crossbow, and a level 5 sniper heavy crossbow. In the long-range troop class of the Kingdom of Rhodok, a level 2 crossbow was a light crossbow, a level 3 skilled crossbow was a crossbow, a level 4 veteran crossbow was a heavy crossbow used by a level 5 troop class of Swadian sniper, and a level 5 Rhodok sniper used the strongest mass-produced heavy crossbow in the entire continent of Karadia, the siege crossbow. Just by looking at the literal meaning of the name, one could tell how powerful was the siege crossbow. It had already far surpassed the heavy crossbow, its power to destruct reaching a terrifying degree. Within 50 meters, it could directly pierce through the steel shield with the strongest defense. Within 150 meters, it could pierce through the chain armor, causing fatal injuries to the flesh within. Within the limit of 300 meters, it could still pierce the armored scale armor. This explained why the heavy armored cavalry of the Kingdom of Swadia was invincible in the plains, traversing the grasslands, snowfields, deserts, and coastal areas. As long as it was a flat area, they could crush the enemy. However, it was in the Rhodok's mountain area. They could not do anything to these mountain people who did not even have cavalry. However, in this world, a foreign world with Kant as the main body, the appearance of the Kingdom of Rhodok allowed Kant's forces to enter the Sinway range. With the help of powerful infantrymen and powerful long-range archers, they were like a nail, firmly nailed into this mountain range. Although he was more fond of the Kingdom of Ravenstone, but he didn't reject the Kingdom of Rhodok. After all, although the troop class of the Kingdom of Rhodok was complete, and the four routes of close combat infantrymen, close combat cavalry, long-range archers, and long-range archers were all full, and the time needed to level up was also much longer. Moreover, in the Sinway range, which had an extremely complex terrain, the only two types that could be relied on were close combat infantrymen and long-range archers. After all, the Sinway range was just a mountain range. Unlike the Kingdom of Rhodok, which had the majestic misty mountains and the slopes of the snowy plains that were suitable for cavalry to gallop on, there were still some differences between the two. The Kingdom of Rhodok that had been drawn this time was just right for the Sinway range, which was all mountainous regions. Not to mention the most important point. The strongest archer system of the Ravenstone Kingdom had already appeared within Kant's forces. The Ranger camp was an example. As long as the rank 4 troop class, the Ravenstone Ranger, level up to the rank 5 troop class, the archery skills that had once terrified the barbarian tribes in the Misty Mountains would reappear within the Sinway range. This was also the reason why Kant did not regret losing the force of the Ravenstone Kingdom. Rhodok's soldiers and Rhodok's snipers had completely made up for the lack of close combat troops in the Ravenstone Kingdom, as well as the fact that it was difficult to deal damage to the enemy's heavy armored troops in a short period of time. After all, although it was easy for the Ravenstone Kingdom to slaughter the barbarian tribes in the Misty Mountains, in the face of the Feldspar Kingdom, the Kingdom of Sarion, and the Empire's expeditionary army, they were completely at a disadvantage. The reason was that the Raventon Kingdom's troop class had sufficient output. However, they lacked the ability to withstand attacks from the enemy. Now, the combination of the best parts of the two could be considered as complementing each other. After all, although the Kingdom of Rhodok's troops had strong defense and sufficient power of long-range shooting, the efficiency of long-range continuous damage was extremely low. Compared to the title of Viegir Marksman's rapid-fire machine gun, Rhodok's sniping was very vivid. Kant's lips curled up slightly. Construct the council hall. Data streams flashed in front of his eyes, and the council hall of the Kingdom of Rhodok in his mind instantly turned into golden powder with his voice. Kant's thoughts materialized in this world. The stream of data spread, condensing into a data chain that swept through the center of the mountain peak in front of him. A foundation made of stone appeared. A floor made of neat stones, walls, and roofs made of wood appeared. The council hall was about 500 square meters. It had 2 floors. It was a villa that was still made of stone and wood. At the same time, there was a small chimney extending out from the top, and green smoke was rising. It seemed that there were even people living in this council hall that had just materialized in this world. A dialogue box popped up on his retina. Ding! Your village has been established. Please name it. Kant's expression was calm. He lowered his head slightly in thought and directly said to the system, "Name it Aran." Aran was the most famous city in the Kingdom of Rhodok. The entire continent of Karadia was known as the most inland city with the most complicated environment. It was the most troublesome city to conquer. Even after the capital fell, he could use the complex mountain terrain near Aran to defend the local area and plan a comeback. Kant named this village Aran and planned to use it as a strategic town. Ding! Village name, Aran. The village was officially named. The dialog box on the retina refreshed. The village interface of Aran also appeared on the retina. Aran. Lord, Kant. Type, Rhodok's village. Population, 50. Troops, 10. Constructions available, Council Hall. Constructions available, House, City Wall, Mill, Watchtower, Well. Current forces, Rhodoks, 10. Recruitable, Rhodoks, Council Hall. Comment, this unremarkable village is called Aran. It is located at the edge of the mountain range. There is no need to describe it too much. It is enough to know that its future is concerning. Kant scanned the village interface. He could not help but smile bitterly. It was indeed as the system's introduction had said, the future was concerning. The entire village was too simple and crude. It was just like back in the Oasis lookout, when Trondheim had just been established. But now was not the past. Back then, Kant had to fight to the death in exchange for the prosperity of the current Trondheim. Now, Kant wouldn't need to fight with all his might again for Aran. He only needed to mobilize part of the garrison of the Oasis lookout, the fort of Trondheim, and quickly build up the defense system. At the same time, more than 100,000 dinar also added to his confidence to build up Aran. Kant was no longer the same as before. Chapter 187, Kant, who was at ease. The construction of the council hall had been completed. Although this lonely building appeared simple and crude, but it also meant that Aran's village had officially taken shape. Right behind the village, a slight noise could be heard. It was the sound of footsteps and discussions. A group of people walked over quickly. When they saw Kant, their eyes were filled with excitement and exhilaration. "My lord, before you appeared in front of us, your name and your reputation had already spread throughout our lives." The group of people were cheering. They placed their right hands on their chests with extreme respect and then bowed solemnly. This was the most ceremonious etiquette in the kingdom of Rhodoks. "Hello." Kant nodded. In fact, the etiquette of the kingdom of Swadia was the same. The two came from the same source. As for the humiliating kowtow, it was not popular in the continent of Karadia. As for the one-knee kowtow that was similar to the conferring of a knight, it would also be impossible to see if one did not have a certain status or occasion. Kant looked at the peasant and clansmen of Rhodoks. Although they were all in high spirits. According to Kant's gaze, these 50 honest peasant of Rhodoks and 10 basic level 1 soldiers of Rhodoks really had the word weak written all over their faces. The 50 Rhodoks peasant held a round sickle that was used to cut wheat. The 10 Rhodoks people were slightly better. They were wearing old leather armor, a butcher's knife was attached to the coarse cloth belt, and between their hands were grass forks that had been sharpened and polished. They upheld the kingdom of Rhodok's tradition of using long weapons. However, they were inferior to the kingdom of Swadia's peasant. At the very least, the peasant in the Oasis lookout could still wield a long scythe. Although it was a farming tool, it was much better than the round scythe that belonged to a one-handed weapon. Kant even curled up the corner of his mouth into a wicked smile. If these peasants were given an extra hammer to cultivate their own artisan skills, then they could be invincible. The brothers of the worker and peasant class united. Overturn the other world. Cough cough. Kant hurriedly shook his head hard and coughed a few times in slight embarrassment. He threw these somewhat shameful lines and attire out of his mind, allowing his mind to regain its clarity. Now was not the time to let his imagination run wild. These people from the Rhodoks mountain region were indeed quite poor. The weapons used by the Rhodoks clansmen of the Class 1 troops were actually pitchforks and sharp butcher knives. One had to know. The weapons used by the Swajuan recruit of Class 1 troops were actual long spears. Even the melee weapons were hand axes and wooden shields. The difference between the two was like heaven and earth. It could be said that the Swadian recruit could already form a basic combat force. The Class 1 troops of the Rhodoks were still only good for their numbers. Such treatment could only be changed after becoming a Class 2 troop, allowing the low-level troops of the Kingdom of Rhodoks to officially form a combat force that could be used on the battlefield. A Level 2 Rhodoks Spearman. A Level 2 Rhodoks Crossbowman. However, compared to the wealthy Kingdom of Swadia, the Level 2 militia could only be equipped with a spear, hunting crossbow, combat shovel, and wide shield. Being located in a mountainous area, the resources were slightly lacking, and the economy was not developed. The Kingdom of Rhodoks could only be divided into the troop class in detail, the strong character of the infantrymen, who were good at using spears, and the crossbowmen who were directly equipped with light crossbow. This was a system the Kingdom of Rhodoks developed according to its own advantages. The vast majority of the Rhodoks people lived in the mountains. The years of poverty had allowed them to develop an indestructible character strong like a boulder, as well as an emotional state stable like a mountain range. They were the best spearmen in the entire continent of Karadia. When they gathered together side by side into a dense formation, it was the strongest spear formation. And they chose to spread out. With their long-hilted broadswords in hand, they were like brown bears charging and slaughtering. In addition, they were good at using the crossbow due to hunting. The combination of the two formed a mountain army that could sweep through the complicated mountain environment. When the Kingdom of Swadia and the Kingdom of Rhodoks were still one, the infantry and crossbowmen of the Kingdom of Rhodoks, the heavy cavalry of the Kingdom of Swadia, were the strongest combination in the continent of Karadia. Now, the city of Aaron needed to develop. At the very least, he needed to develop it to the level of a fortress in order to restore the glory of the Kingdom of Rhodoks. Relying solely on these peasant and clansmen, how could they combat the dangerous Senway arranged with round sickles and pitchforks in their hands? When Kant left this place, any ordinary magical creature that appeared would be able to slaughter the entire village, and they would have no power to resist, only sending themselves to their deaths in vain. Kant needed a certain arrangement. He narrowed his eyes. His mind communicated with the system, and at the same time, the golden card in his mind instantly shattered into pieces. The data flow began to materialize. Use the construction transfer card to transfer the ranger camp from Trondheim Fortress to Aaron Village. Kant gave the order to the system. Ding, transfer begins. The system answered straightforwardly. The data flow instantly spread, and faint spatial fluctuations appeared. And in the Oasis lookout, the ranger camp that was originally standing in the military zone on the east side, adjacent to the Vergia shooting range, actually spread along with the data flow. It turned into a data flow and turned back into a golden light. At this point, it shuttled back and forth, forming a construction card in Kant's mind. The spatial fluctuations disappeared, and the power of the system's rules returned. Kant's gaze turned to the side of the council hall. He communicated with the golden card in his mind and said in a low voice, "System, construct the building there." A stream of data appeared. On the flat land at the peak of the mountain, a foundation, bricks, wood, and other construction materials appeared out of thin air. In the blink of an eye, the construction of the building was completed from the bottom up. Ding, transfer completed. The system sent a notification. Very good. Kant nodded in satisfaction, but he did not end the construction. Turning his head to look at the flat mountain peak, Kant continued to give orders to the system: build 10 houses around the council hall. At the same time, build a city wall at the top of the mountain and build a well. Ding, system prompt. Village level construction, continuous construction of buildings. Each building will cost an additional 100 dinar. This construction will cost a total of 2,400 dinar. Would you like to construct? Construct, Kant replied. There was no need to hesitate. A mere 2,400 dinar was not a huge sum of money. The data stream continued to emerge. At the foot of the mountain, 10 carriages and more than 100 people walked over. Dressed in the clothes of the Rhodoks people, they looked up at the peak of the mountain and shouted at each other as they walked up. They did not seem to be bothered by the pathless mountain. Instead, they weren't too slow, and it did not take long for them to arrive at the edge of the mountain peak. "Honorable Lord Kant, we meet again." The leader of the strong men looked at Kant in surprise. He quickly put his hands on his chest and bowed. "We met when we built the well in the desert. You also helped me send a letter home to Knight Fatus." "It's you." Kant nodded. He also thought of this man. It's me," the leader of the construction team in Variga." This construction leader nodded with a smile, as if he was happy that Kant still remembered him. At the same time, he hurriedly waved his hand behind him, shouting to the construction workers, "Come up quickly. This is Lord Kant's new estate. We must work hard this time. We can't let Lord Kant's buildings have any flaws. It's really Lord Kant. We've really come to the land of miracles." "Ah, that's right, it's really Lord Kant. It's really him. Lord Kant of the land of miracles. Oh my God, we're working for Lord Kant." Behind them, the Variga construction workers looked pleasantly surprised. They all looked at Kant with extreme excitement and walked forward one after another, ignoring the carriage behind them. They hurriedly put their hands on their chests and bowed respectfully. Their attitude was so respectful that it was impeccable. "Very good." Kant nodded and said to them, "Be careful." He got the respectful replies of the construction workers in return. The people who came out of the Rhodok mountains were all top-notch soldiers or workers. Their personalities were as steady and simple as the mountains. This was also the reason why the people of Rhodok had a better reputation. There were very few swindlers among them, and on the contrary, the kingdom of Swadia and the kingdom of Nords had the most number of swindlers. Kant dismissed these construction workers as they busied themselves. At the same time, he also gave orders to the 50 peasant and 10 clansmen. Using the farm tools in their hands, they cleaned up the weeds and bushes at the peak of the mountain. At the same time, they also had to clean up the small forest and level the thousands of acres of land, which would be the foundation of the village in the future. For this, Kant also found the tools that he bought from the stone pass. He had the peasant cut all the small trees as thick as bowls with a logging axe. Then, he used a round sickle to clean up the branches. Finally, he cut them into pieces and piled them up as firewood for future use. Or, he dug out mud pits and made them into charcoal kilns. He burned excellent charcoal and sent it back to the Oasis lookout for use. Kant was not the noble young master he was when the village was first established. Now, he was handling it smoothly and orderly. At the same time, for the sake of the safety of Aaron's village, Kant's thought reconnected with the system and silently said, "System, recruit this week's 10 Ravenstone Rangers." Ding. System prompt. The recruitment price for Ravenstone Rangers is 30 dinar per person, a total of 300 dinar for 10 people. Yes/no? Recruit. Kant calmly made his choice. Just as the 300 dinar disappeared from Kant's mind, in the ranger camp that was close to the council hall, 10 Ravenstone Rangers quickly walked out, wearing nail-studded leather jackets and carrying heavy battle bows. On their backs hung two-handed great swords. There was also a row of cone arrows in the quiver at their waist. As level 4 rangers, their equipment was not much inferior to level 5 rangers. Armor-piercing cone arrows were the standard equipment of the Rexton Kingdom. After all, although the barbarians in the Misty Mountains wore simple leather armor, the armor they wore was extremely thick. If they did not have these cone arrows that were specially used to break armor, just relying on ordinary arrows and barbs that dealt more damage to unarmored targets would obviously be slightly inferior in terms of damage. They wouldn't be able to maintain the normal stability of the Ravenstone Kingdom. Chapter 188, The Evil Aura of the Cave. However, this was enough. Forest rangers with excellent archery skills could form quite a strong fighting force. As time passed, the number of forest rangers increased. With the appearance of a top-notch archery master like the Ravenstone Ranger, they could firmly guard this Aaron village located on the peak of the mountain. Although ordinary demonized creatures were powerful against these level 4 rangers, they would be shot to death before they could get too close. Moreover, they had the assistance of the crossbowmen of the kingdom of Rhodoks. Long-range sniping with a siege crossbow, medium-range shooting with a heavy bow, and short-range shooting with precision. Let alone ordinary demonized creatures, even savage demonized creatures, if they were to be held back by a wide shield heavy armored infantryman, they could be turned into dead hedgehogs in minutes. But in the early stage, we still need to rely on the rangers as the main force to deal damage. Kant pondered slightly. The Rhodok's tribe members recruited from the peasant tribe were the lowest level Class 1 troops. Their combat strength could not be counted on at all. It was better to let the rangers lead these tribe members to hunt some demonized creatures in the Scenway range and gain some experience while they were at it. Only by upgrading to a higher level up troop class would they be able to properly play their own role. Upgrading the troop class was also a helpless move. Not only was it troublesome, but it also consumed time. It was completely different from the Desert Bandits, Vergia's archers, and the Ravenstone Rangers who were directly recruited from within the buildings. It was easy and convenient. Thinking of leveling up. Kant already his troop class maxed out with experience points, allowing him to level up. Mind Direct Communication System. The retina refreshed before his eyes, and the dialog box for level up for the troop class popped up. It was those 7 horsemen, the Sarandian knights that survived the Stone Pass contest with Kant, killed the ordinary demonized black bears in the Scenway mountain range, narrowly won against savage demonized lions, and survived by a hair's breadth. Their experience points had finally reached full value, and they could level up to level 5, Mamluk horsemen. He paid the dinar. The 7 Sarandian horsemen had all transformed. 7 Mamluks, wearing Sarandian heavy chain armor, appeared at various places on the mountain peak. Their equipment had been replaced. The weapons and equipment that were originally broken or damaged had been swapped out with the latest and best models. Even the nearby Sarandian horsemen were also wearing heavy chain armor. Compared to before, they had at most added linen to their outfits, and their combat power and defense had increased several times. The price was that their weight had increased, and their stamina would be consumed a little faster. Even their charging speed was not as fast as their time as Sarandian horsemen. Even their infantry combat ability was a qualitative improvement compared to the Sarandian horsemen. If it was calculated using the default combat power system of this world, they had reached the peak of the knight class. According to Kant's understanding, if there was a Grand Knight mentor who was willing to use a year of weakness and only 5 enlightenment opportunities to let these Class 5 troop understand extraordinary power, then these level 5 Mamluks would be able to advance to an even higher level, the extraordinary troop class. Perhaps they would even be able to break through the system barrier of level 5 and reach an even more terrifying level Class 6. Of course, this was just a thought. The Dukedom of Leo was founded on martial arts. The number of Grand Knights could be counted on one's hands. Even if there were Grand Knights hidden in the shadows, it probably would not exceed 50 people. After all, after enlightenment, whether a knight could comprehend extraordinary power or not was still 2 different things. After enlightenment, one would not be able to directly become a Grand Knight with extraordinary power. One would still need to rely on one's own cultivation. Otherwise, with the ability of the Dukedom of Leo, it was simply too easy to nurture a knight regiment that was composed entirely of Grand Knights over time. But most importantly, which Grand Knight was willing to spend a huge price to enlighten his subordinates for Kant, an exiled baron who had already offended most of the noble families and had almost no place in the Dukedom of Leo? None at all. Kant, of course, understood this point. He shook his head and sighed helplessly. Perhaps I'll have to rely on the system to help me with my supernatural powers. As the Golden Finger who's experienced transmigration, the system's function basically ran through the entire situation. If there were any questions or doubts, Kant would receive excellent answers from the system. Now that he thought about it, the legendary supernatural powers had already been given a similar temporary quest by the system at the Stone Pass. According to the nature of the system, it had probably already started thinking about how to infuse the supernatural power of this world into the troop class of the system. It's best if the system can solve it. Kant's expression was calm. Even without supernatural powers, with the troop class of the system and the tactics of thousands of knights forming a sea of people, it would not be a problem for them to defend a certain place. Although they could not dominate the world, it was not easy to be a warlord of a certain place. Looking at the busy Rhodok's peasant and the Rhodok's tribesman who helped him, Kant nodded to himself. At least for now, he was still developing at a high speed. However, just as he was patrolling the peak of the mountain, a Mamluk walked over quickly, revealing only 2 eyes under the full mask. He was cold and calm. "My lord, we found something unusual at the west peak of the mountain." "Unusual?" Kant frowned slightly. This made him curious, so he said, "Lead the way." "Yes." The Mamluk turned around. The Sarandian heavy chain armor on his body made a slight rustling sound as he walked. The overall rhythm was smooth, showing the degree of excellence of this Mamluk and the excellent workmanship of the chain armor. The area where they said they found the abnormality was not far away. At the western central edge of the mountain peak, the other 6 Mamluks were waiting. Both of their hands were holding the 2-handed iron staffs that looked like little melons in front of them. Their eyes were equally cold. The surrounding 10 Ravenstone Rangers also noticed that something was wrong. They held their heavy battle bows and also quickly walked over. "My lord." They nodded in respect to Kant. "Yes." Kant directly asked, "What happened?" "At the west side of the mountain peak, halfway up the mountain, we discovered an unknown cave. We also heard a low roar from inside. I'm afraid that there are demonized creatures like before." The leading Mamluk quickly explained. "A demonized creature?" Kant narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Are you sure?" "Almost certainly." The other Mamluk nodded and replied in a similarly solemn tone, "We heard a low roar inside, and there are traces of wild beasts around the cave. There is definitely a demonized creature." Kant pulled out his knight sword and said in a deep voice, "Let's go and take a look." 7 Mamluks and 10 Ravenstone Rangers immediately got ready for battle status. However, Kant glanced at the 10 Rhodok's people not far away. They were the lowest class 1 troop of the current Aran village. He waved at the Rhodok's people who were best at farming and called them over to join the battle sequence. If they encountered enemies, they could also gain experience to level up. After walking down the mountain peak, Kant personally led a team to walk in front. Beside him was the Mamluks wearing heavy armor. The 10 Ravenstone Rangers and the 10 Rhodok's people stood at the back. If anything happened, they would be able to provide timely support. The terrain on the west side of the mountain peak was relatively gentle. Although there was a drop, it was less than half a meter. Walking carefully, they quickly approached the mountainside. It was a flat area of about 30 meters. The cave was located on the inner side of the flat area near the mountain. There were dense shrubs and forests around it. However, if one looked carefully, one could vaguely see that there were many dense white bones scattered on the flat ground in front of the cave. Moreover, there were many piles of them. The colors were different, so it was obvious that these bones had been scattered here for a long time. The Mamluks had been down the cave to investigate before, so he knew where to go. Kant, who was at the front, stopped for a moment. 10 Ravenstone Rangers drew their all arrows and put them on their heavy bows. 2 Mamluks took the lead and walked down the flat ground, holding 2 iron staffs in their hands. They carefully explored the interior of the cave and made sure that there was no danger for the time being. Then, they waved to Kant and the others on the hillside, indicating that they could come down. But even so, they did not let their guard down. Because when Kant came down, he realized that this cave was really a cave. 2 meters high and 3 meters wide, a cold wind slowly blew from outside. Accompanied by that faint growl from inside, Kant subconsciously tightened his grip on the knight's sword in his hand. The knight's body also gave him accurate hearing. The growl that the Mamluk spoke of did exist. Even Kant's ears moved slightly, and he could recognize that the growl was almost mournful and desolate, as well as violent and ferocious, full of negative emotions. Kant would not have believed that it was anything other than a demonized creature. He narrowed his eyes slightly. He looked into the depths of the cave. But since the cave was facing west, the sunlight couldn't penetrate it. Kant could only see 2 to 3 meters inside the cave. He could still vaguely see the smooth stone walls. If he continued to look into the depths, he couldn't see anything at all. Except for the darkness that seemed to have been accumulating since the ancient times. "My lord, something is wrong." An arrow was knocked on the heavy battle bow behind him. The serious-looking Ravenstone ranger said solemnly, "In front of this cave, I feel an evil aura circulating. This reminds me of the legend spread by the elves of Rhodok, which is the underworld that the Dark Knights believe in." "Hey!" Kant's face suddenly turned serious. He turned his head to look at the equally serious Ravenstone ranger, and his breathing became heavy. Underworld. Underworld invaders. The Pandey continent, where the Ravenstone kingdom was located, was a fantasy world. That's right, it wasn't a world devoid of history. Even on the Pandey continent, there were still ancient races left behind, the Rhodok elves. Even when the race was on the verge of extinction, they still had a little magic. And on the Pandey continent, there were also various artifacts. And even more mysterious legends of the underworld. As a player, Kant naturally knew that the legends of the underworld were true. The Dark Knights would eventually become servants of the underworld, that is, those Death Knights who had lost their human emotions. And the real invaders of the underworld were the underworld demons. Powerful and evil. Ordinary human troops could not match them at all. Now, this Ravenstone ranger actually said that the evil aura in this cave reminded him of the legendary intruders of the underworld, which was not good news for Kant. Chapter 189, Release of the Main Quest. Kant's expression was grave. If it really was an enemy at a level comparable to that of the underworld invaders, then it would be troublesome. According to Pandey's prophecy, a 7-man underworld invasion team could easily slaughter a regular army of 300 people. Even if all of them were the powerful Sarian Lion Knights, the final result would be the tragic end of all of them being wiped out. It would be difficult for a regular human to fight against the Rhodok elves at sunset, let alone a real underworld demon. At this moment, the system dialog box instantly popped up on his vision. Ding! Main quest released. Main quest, The Secret in the Cave. Reward, 50,000 dinar, 5,000 reputation, 5 honor. Introduction, there seems to be evil hidden in this cave. You have decided to lead a team to explore and find the hidden secret. Although the road ahead is unknown, with the heart of a brave man, you think you will find a little surprise. Kant's eyes flashed. Main quest. The main quest had not appeared for a long time. Now, it was actually right in front of this cave, directly announced by the system. Kant's heart wavered. He thought of what the Ravenstone ranger had said, as well as the ruins of the lost city that he had found when he had just arrived at the peak of the mountain, and even the sun disk that had been absorbed by the system. Something's not right. Kant looked at the deep and dark cave and slowly clenched the knight's sword in his hand. However, he still planned to go in and take a look. After all, this was the system's main quest, not a temporary quest that could be abandoned. Although he did not know how much danger was inside, Kant still turned his head, ordering the soldiers behind him in a deep voice, "Tell the 50 Rhodok's peasant to put down their work and wait for orders on the hillside." Understood. One of the Rhodok's people nodded and picked up his pitchfork to climb up the hillside again. He went to gather the peasant who were still working with their scythes and went to the edge of the west side of the mountain to wait for orders. If anything happened, these weak peasant might be able to hinder the enemy's efforts. It was not because Kant was cold. It was because they could only play this role in battle. At the same time, the peasant used this time to prepare simple torches made of wooden sticks and old clothes. They doused them with oil found in the storeroom of the council hall and swiftly made 20 torches, enough for 3 hours of lighting. Everyone was ready. The torches were lit. The 2 Rhodok's tribesmen held them and slowly walked into the cave. These 2 people were the first to investigate. Although their combat strength was very poor, they could immediately retreat if they found anything unusual. After all, they were only wearing thick leather robes. Compared to the Mamluk tribesmen who were wearing Sarandian heavy chain armor, they were completely light-armored units and were naturally more agile and swift in speed. As for the Rhodok's tribesmen who were born in the Rhodok's mountain region and had undergone a little military training, they turned around and fled when they encountered danger that they could not deal with. Obviously, there was no problem at all. Kant had told them in advance that they were allowed to flee when they were in danger. This was also the confidence of the 2 Rhodok's tribesmen. The first tribesman held a torch in his left hand and a sharp butcher knife in his right hand. His companion beside him looked nervously at the interior of the cave. His 2 hands were tightly holding onto the grass pitchfork that had polished the front end until it shone with a cold light. Each step he took was quite steady, and he did not dare to relax even a little. There were piles of white bones on the empty ground outside. Even inside the cave, they would stumble upon the bones from time to time. With their weight, the bones they stepped on inside the cave cracked against the ground. This sound reverberated in the cave. It was as if even the darkness had solidified. The low growls that had originally lingered in their eardrums also disappeared, which made the 2 of them even more solemn. There was definitely danger. However, the 2 of them still walked forward slowly. According to their calculations, they were probably already 100 meters deep into the cave. And it was from the top down. It was a downhill path. However, the air in the cave was still relatively fresh, and there was not the slightest stench of decay, which made the 2 of them feel a little more at ease. No strange smell meant that there were no wild beasts. At the same time, the air was fresh, which meant that there might be flowing water in the cave, or other cave openings, that allowed the air in the entire cave to flow. This was the experience of those from the Rhodok's mountain area. However, the 2 of them stopped. The torches were still burning, and there was a slight burnt smell. The 2 of them looked at each other. They saw the fear and uneasiness in each other's eyes. They were already quite far into the cave, nearly 100 meters deep. Their entire bodies were cold, and with 2 layers of leather jackets on, they shivered uncontrollably. They were deep into the ground of the mountain. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so cold. What frightened them was still ahead. Their instincts as the Rhodok's people told them that perhaps they shouldn't continue forward. In the area just beyond their torchlight, the darkness seemed to be frozen. They turned their heads to look in the direction they came from. Only a few white spots were still visible, giving them a sense of direction and a sense of security. Something's wrong. The Rhodok's holding the torches gulped. Looking at the darkness in front of him, he clenched the slaughtering knife in his hand. I keep getting this feeling that there's danger ahead. Perhaps it shouldn't be a territory we should step into. Pausing for a moment, he asked in a low voice, "Why don't we go back?" But the other Rhodok's also gulped. "The mission that Lord Kant gave us hasn't been completed. Let's leave." The Rhodok's holding the torch took half a step back and looked at the darkness in front of them. He became more and more fearful. "Lord Kant told us that if there is any danger, we can leave. He is merciful. We are only the lowest level militia. We are not even regular infantry. Lord Kant won't punish us if we leave after sensing danger. Is that so?" The Rhodok's nodded, his face pale. He held his pitchfork tightly with both hands and nodded. "Then let's go back." They decided not to continue going forward. They had covered enough distance. Although they did not discover anything useful. In their perception, if they continued to walk down this cave and to arrive at the legendary underworld, where only the dead could live, they would stay there forever, enduring the endless torture of entering the underworld without permission. Thinking of this, they hurriedly turned around and retreated. They ran as fast as can as if escaping from a lost battle, their faces filled with panic. Perhaps they were scaring themselves. But they felt that there was no harm in running faster. But when they ran for more than 10 meters, an extremely violent emotion seemed to be transmitted from the frozen darkness behind them. Pairs of scarlet eyes instantly opened in the darkness. With a certain kind of anger, they let out low roars, which were extremely clear in the cave. The sound reverberated, bouncing off the surrounding walls. Roar! The two Rhodok's tribesmen in the cave ran even faster. Their faces were filled with extreme panic and fear. Only now did they realize that they had made a wise choice to turn around and flee. As they ran, they turned their heads to look behind them, wanting to see what exactly happened in the depths of the cave. When the torch-holding Rhodok's tribesman swept his gaze behind him, he only felt his scalp go numb, and his entire mind went blank for a moment. Subconsciously, he picked up the torch and smashed it fiercely into the depths of the cave, and his fleeing figure went even faster. The two of them panted as they escaped from the cave. With their minds blank, they did not even know that they should bow and report to Kant. But Kant did not care. Pull them out. Kant frowned and ordered in a deep voice, "Forest patrollers, prepare to shoot." The Mamluk who stood guard at the entrance of the cave with a two-handed iron staff in hand directly dragged the two of them, who were paralyzed from fear and that extreme running, and stood in front of the cave in an orderly manner. His eyes under the helmet were extremely cold, and there was also a hint of solemnity and shock. Right behind the 7 steel-like Mamluks, the 10 Ravenstone Rangers had already drawn the heavy battle bows in their hands into a full moon. The all arrows had already been knocked on the bowstring. The dense arrowheads were aimed at the inner side of the cave. Their eyes were fixed on their target, and their breathing had already slowed down slightly. This was their shooting posture. Even Kant held his knight's sword tightly. He gazed into the interior of the cave. About 50 meters away, the torch was still burning, dispersing the darkness within. But they could clearly see it. Right opposite the torch, in the darkness of the depths of the cave, pairs of scarlet eyes were staring outside. Their eyes were filled with unconcealed brutality and hatred, as well as viciousness to slaughter all that enter their sight. And that coldness poured out of the cave in greater and greater measures. It faintly enveloped Kant. He did not expect that at the bottom of his Aran village, just a short distance away, there would be such a huge danger entrenched. If he did not handle it well and this wasn't discovered by the careful Mamluk, he reckoned that some time after he leaves, the Aran village, which had yet to mobilize its troops, would be destroyed by the enemy. All the soldiers stationed there would be killed. The owners of those scarlet eyes inside. They were all demonized creatures. Moreover, they were the demonized wolves who most liked to band together hunt in groups among the demonized creatures. Kant was sure. Although he didn't understand why these demonized wolves were afraid of that small torch. But Kant knew that as soon as that torch is extinguished, those demonized wolves will rush out of the cave and charge towards them. Howl! A mournful wolf howl sounded. It was similar to the wolf howl of Jack Allen, but also completely different. It was filled with the extreme brutality, hatred, and desire to tear everything apart. The torch has extinguished. The layers of scarlet eyes in the cave rushed out like a flood. The sound of claws hitting the ground was accompanied by low growls, and it grew louder and louder, enlarged by the cave. Fire! Kant swung his sword forward without hesitation. The 10 Ravenstone Rangers, who were already prepared, immediately released their bowstrings. The all arrows tore through the air and instantly reached inside the cave. A few pairs of scarlet eyes fell to the ground. But the Ravenstone Rangers did not stop. They pulled out the all arrows from their waists and continued to fire with the heavy battle bows in their hands. One arrow after another was fired continuously, like a semi-automatic rifle. The scarlet eyes were getting closer and closer, but they were also getting fewer and fewer. Face the enemy head-on. The 7 Mamluks were still unafraid. They raised their iron staffs with both hands and faced the pitch-black wolf head that was already faintly visible. They smashed down heavily. Along with the heart-wrenching wolf howl, blood splattered everywhere, and chunks of brain tissue flew in all directions. Chapter 190, Detecting Something Wrong. The two-handed iron staff was a variant of Salander's two-handed war hammer. From the handle to the hammer's head, the entire body was made of fine iron. When swung, even if one was wearing the most top-tier heavy plate armor, the weak inner abdomen would still be heavily injured for several months. Even a demonized wolf, which had undergone demonization and became far stronger than ordinary wolves, would still have their dark red blood mixed with the grayish-white brain remains splashed on the entrance of the cave, covering it layer after layer pathetically with each swing of the Mamluk, who had near-perfect close combat skills. The entrance of the cave was only 3 meters wide and 2 meters high. No matter how crazily the demonized wolves in the cave attacked, they could not move beyond the Mamluks, who stood firmly in the same spot. Even if they gritted their teeth and swung their sharp claws, they could not cause any harm to the Mamluk who were wearing the heavy chain armor of Sarandian. Other than scraping the wrought iron plate with exquisite patterns and tearing open the extremely dense links, they could not break through Mamluk's defense in the end. The 7 Mamluks stood in 2 rows, and groups of demonized wolves fell at their feet. As more and more demonized wolves pounced out, the Mamluks even took out their elite machetes and held the steel shield in their left hand, raising a wave of dense steel shadows, slaughtering these demonized wolves more efficiently. The cavalry of Sarandian Sultanate all used the machetes as their melee weapons. It was made for this very moment. The two-handed iron staffs could not kill these demonized wolves as effectively. The elite machetes, which were known for their sharpness and could cut off the claws of wolves, could make these 7 Sarandian horsemen knights look like indestructible gods. Even when their bodies were stained with a large amount of dark red blood with a strong stench, and the demonized wolves' corpses had reached their knees, they still refused to retreat. They firmly guarded the entrance of the cave. They would never let these extremely dangerous demonized wolves rush out. Lord Kant's Aran village was right above their heads. If they retreated, the village would be massacred. These crazy and violent demonized wolves would definitely use the blood of humans in exchange for the price of rushing out of the cave. Only after killing all the peasant farmers in Aran village in a frenzy and devouring them whole, would the demonized wolves finally be able to return to peace. The Mamluks would not see such a tragic scene. Kant, as the Lord, would not allow such a tragedy to happen. Front row, back row, forward. He ordered in a deep voice. The Mamluks, who were originally in 2 rows, immediately changed their formation according to his order. The 3 Mamluks at the front of the cave retreated, while the 4 Mamluks at the back took large strides forward. They continued to swing their sharp machetes, slaughtering the demonized wolves one after another with their scarlet eyes wide open, chopping off heads and bodies, leaving only a thick pile of corpses and blood under their feet. Even the Ravenstone Rangers held 2-handed great swords in their hands and slashed at the demonized wolves that were lucky enough to escape Mamluk's slash. The exquisite swordsmanship that they had gained in the Misty Mountains could almost compare to their archery skills. The low howls of the demonized wolves gradually turned into wails. Howl! As the demonized wolves behind them turned around and fled into the depths of the cave, the originally frenzied wolves suddenly stopped their attacks and retreated one after another. They howled miserably in low voices and fled from the cave entrance like defeated dogs. The near-frenzied succession of attacks finally eased, and the exhausted Mamluks let out a sigh of relief. It's finally over. The Mamluks in the front row put down the machete in their hands. In the short span of 10 minutes, the number of times they swung the machete had almost reached a couple hundred. It had completely reached their limits. As real men made of flesh and blood, they would also feel tired and their arms were sore. They might even have pulled their muscles. Send a few over. Kant put the knight's sword back into its sheath and instructed the Rhodoks beside him, go and help them back to the council hall to rest. Also, arrange for the peasant to prepare food and dinner. It seems that we will have to spend the next few days here.
Understood.
The Rhodoks nodded and moved quickly. They helped the Mamluks up the mountain peak with respect. At the same time, the peasant carefully used tools to form a mountain path that was barely walkable on the slope at the foot of the mountain peak. From the edge of the mountain peak to the cave halfway up the mountain. That was a dangerous place that was worth paying attention to. At the entrance of the cave, the thick smell of blood was accompanied by a fishy smell. Corpses were piled up all over the ground, but because the cave entrance was high and the cave was low, the blood flowed into the cave like a stream. In this battle, Mamluk and the Ravenstone Rangers combined had killed almost 200 demonized wolves. Of course, the main combat force was still these level 5 cavalry. Even if they dismounted to fight, they were still several times stronger than the level 4 Sarandian horsemen. If the Sarandian horsemen were to face this battle, they would probably lose 2 or 3 people in order to successfully stop the terrifying frenzied charge of this demonized wolf pack. After all, their equipment was not full body armor, only armor covering the main parts of their bodies. In this aspect alone, the two could not be compared, not to mention the difference in battle will and fighting skills. Dig out the gems in the hearts of these demonic wolves. Kant ordered the Rhodoks peasant who came down from behind. These peasant immediately complied, but when they squatted down and used the round sickles in their hands to peel open the chest of the demonic wolves looking for the hearts, their faces were filled with confusion and strangeness. "What's going on?" Kant asked. A peasant pulled out his bloody hand and said with some puzzlement, "My lord, there isn't the gemstone you mentioned." "What?" Kant frowned. "Indeed there isn't." The peasant of Rhodoks continued to reach in, grabbing. Some even took out the heart of the demonized wolf and used the round sickle in their hands to chop and mash it up. There was still nothing but dark red blood dripping, the strong smell of blood with a slightly rotten smell filling the entire entrance of the cave. "This is impossible." Kant's expression flickered slightly. He quickly walked over and personally reached out to pick up a demonized wolf. The knight's sword in his hand ruthlessly cut open the belly under the ribs. Dark red blood with a fishy smell immediately flowed out. However, Kant was not afraid. He reached into its chest and searched for a moment. His expression suddenly looked awful. He grabbed the heart with one hand and pulled it out of the chest of the demonized wolf. However, when he crushed the heart viciously, he still did not find the 2 pitch-black gemstones in the hearts of the demonized black bear and demonized lion. "What is going on?" Kant lowered his head and narrowed his eyes. His expression was a little awkward. These pitch-black gemstones were the most precious things about these demonized creatures. They were deeply loved by the mages in the Mage Tower. With these in hand, it was equivalent to sacks of silver coins. However, there were no such black gemstones in the hearts of these 200 demonized wolves. Kant felt a deep sense of incomprehension. That there was a black gem in the heart of a demonized creature. This was not something he only just knew. Even when he was studying in the academy, he already found out this secret in books. Even the hunters in the villages south of the Sinway range who were lucky enough to kill a demonized creature would know to check the heart and look for the black gem. Then, he would exchange it for a great silver coin from the merchants, buy more than 10 acres of land and become a well-known farmer. But no matter what, there should be such a black gemstone inside the demonized creatures. Dark red blood was still dripping from the gaps between his fingers. Kant casually threw the heart remains on the ground. He ordered the peasant in a deep voice, "Hide all the corpses of these demonized wolves and burn them. I don't want such a strong smell of blood to attract other stronger demonized creatures."
"Understood."
The peasant nodded and began to move. Kant shook his head gloomily. "My lord, wipe your hands." The Ravenstone Ranger handed over a wet towel. It was probably soaked in clean water and had just been taken down to wipe the long sword or armor that had been stained with blood, to prevent the blood from sticking and causing corrosion.
"Yes."
Kant nodded and took it. The wet towel was quickly dyed dark red by his blood-stained hands. However, while Kant was wiping, he lowered his head to look at the dark red blood on the towel. His expression was slightly stunned as he subconsciously looked towards the entrance of the cave. Under the corpse of the demonized wolf that had been dragged, there was dark red blood all over the ground. Even on the stone wall beside him, there was a small amount of grayish-white brain matter that had been smashed out by the two-handed iron staff. Raising his eyebrows slightly, the doubt in Kant's eyes deepened. However, when he looked into the depths of the cave, he also had a flash of realization in his heart. He finally understood why the demonized creature that he had killed did not have any gemstones in its heart. They're not real demonized creatures. Kant spoke slowly, his tone somewhat solemn. He had once seen a similar explanation in the Academy's books on demonized creatures. A real demonized creature would grow pitch-black scales all over its body, and its skin would turn pitch-black. Its body would grow rapidly, and its strength, speed, and physical strength would all increase. At the same time, the blood flowing in its veins would turn pitch-black. The brain matter in its head would also turn black. Just like the demonized black bear that Kant had killed, and the demonized lion that took a lot of effort to kill at the top of the mountain, they all had the same pitch-black blood and brain matter. Even their hoof tendons and muscles were black. Although these demonized wolves with dark red blood were much stronger than ordinary forest wolves, they still didn't reach the terrifying level of the legendary demonized wolves. According to the lucky survivors, the demonized wolves that were good at group battle and speed were the most difficult demonized creatures to deal with. Although the demonized black bear's skin was rough and its flesh was thick. Although the demonized lion's strength was formidable. A large number of demonized wolves was actually the greatest threat to humans. P.S. I recommend a book in the same writing and hacking genre, Dream Control Game. A game producer with a strange sleeping sickness, reincarnated as a man who controlled dreams. He disguises the dream space as a virtual game. When he was sleeping and dreaming, the dream control game would begin.